Jordan. It's my pleasure to introduce Frank Field. As Anthony said, you might wonder why Frank Field would be appearing at a meeting like this, where many of the faces are familiar to the kind of sort of broadcasting merry-go-round, the broadcasting policy merry-go-round that tours the country. And the one person you wouldn't necessarily expect to see is Frank Field, because broadcasting has its problems, but 75% unemployment in the northwest of England is not one of them yet. It's really interesting, I think, that Frank Field should have been the originator of the idea of having a meeting like this. And so I don't say any more than ask Frank, from a complete outsider's point of view, in the sense that you're not part of this sort of policy circus, why do you think this debate is important, and what aspects of what's going on in broadcasting really interest you?
It's important for one reason. Can people hear me all right?
Yeah.
I don't know whether this microphone does, but anyway, I get slightly near it. It's important for one reason, and that is for practically the entire history of this country. We've lived out our private lives and our public lives by way of subscribing to a public ideology. For most of that time, it was a Christian ideology. And then if you go back 150 years, where thoughtful people like you began to question the basis of that ideology, it was secularized into what is technically called English idealism. And this, amazingly, for 100 years, gave people a sense of what they are about themselves, the importance of trying to achieve their best selves, and it gave them a map and compass of how to behave in the public domain. And during my lifetime, I've become part of a generation that no longer has a public ideology or a hymn sheet to which all of us can happily sign up. The one important remnant of that ideology was and is the idea of public service broadcasting. It's the remains that we have of it, which has behind its hidden assumptions, underpinning it all, is this belief about why individuals are here, and what they're trying to achieve, and also collectively what the journey is about. And increasingly I felt that the duty that the BBC has to preserve, nurture and extend the idea of public service broadcasting, and obviously how it's delivered changes over time, is mightily crippled by their perceived need to satisfy people with the types of programs so that they can get away with another license fee. And there are periods, of course, Tessa's here, she will, from a much more detailed living involvement than I will know that when the periods when it was easiest for her to deal with the BBC, when they were most amenable to meeting their public service broadcasting requirements, and then when they felt secure enough for a period of time, what they did to us politicians. And I believe it's important that we initiate a debate about the future of the BBC and its licence fee, and the vital importance of public service broadcasting ourselves, and not merely react to events and how the BBC let or have to let events evolve.
So, do you yourself see a long-term future for the BBC and the licence fee funding, or do you think, though even questions that fundamental are or should be?
The pressure will be on very soon to cut the licence fee. For many of my poorer constituents, it's an outrage that they have to pay it, and all too many of them end up in court charged with not paying it. I often think in my sort of slightly balmier moments, if only that part of the BBC that chases people for the licence fee could have run the CSA, many more mothers, some fathers would actually be getting their maintenance. But anyway, that's a slightly dream world. And I cannot believe that in an age where we have to cut very severely public expenditure, the BBC licence fee is not going to be a part of the debate as that evolves, that tax level. I would hope in an intermediate period, politicians will feel that the BBC can be let down in the finance side in stages. And I've written about it, which is not after you write these things, people tell you when you're original about other people have said similar ideas. I do believe we have to have a body which takes a sizable chunk, very sizable chunk of the licence fee, with a single remit to promote public service broadcasting. That will be in a whole range of outlets, and not just the BBC. But you could see parts of the BBC being totally financed from that. But I do not believe the BBC should be undertaking a range of broadcasting which could, as well, if not better, be done by the private sector.
And you don't take the argument that the BBC with, if you like, structural integrity is an important, is in itself important for the BBC's core, whatever else it does, but in the BBC's core purposes of it, it's a central part of our journalistic landscape and our accountability processes and all the rest of it. Has in that sense, it may not be most of what, it may not be the sum of what it does, but that the entirety supports that function. And if you start taking bits off the edge, in the end, the central function starts to fail.
That's the danger, but the whole function is if we swing forward 20 years in danger of annihilation, not just collapse. And I do think that the new commissioning body, which would have this, in the initial stage, a sizable chunk of a much reduced licence fee, would bear in mind when it was commissioning programmes from the BBC, that it did, the BBC has two great historic roles in this area. One is the training side of people moving into journalism, and secondly, and this is where sort of the Thatcherite revolution is unable to grasp, there are such things as organisations having cultures, and part of that public ideology I talked about deriving from English idealism is still enshrined in the BBC in its attitudes.
Is that a good thing?
Yes, I do think it's a good thing, and I think it needs to be preserved against what would be a different ethic, which is natural and totally proper for the private sector of broadcasting to pay.
So, finally, if I may, do you think that something resembling the status quo is sustainable in the medium term?
No. And the reason for starting this conversation with various people in the room here was a belief that we shouldn't sit by passively and wait for events to unfold. Partly because I think most people in the room have probably got a very clear idea where the train crash will take place. But positively trying to get the very best of what the BBC is preserved in a new world.
Well, good enough. Let's start on that. Your appreciation is Frank Field.
And I'm sorry I'm behaving like a typical politician coming and then leaving, but there is a debate on poverty today, and I want to be there from the very beginning, otherwise I shan't be called.
Cheers. Thank you very much.